Call the meeting to order of the Fetch Junction work session. Roll call.
Mayor Slocco.
Here.
Vice Mayor Eck.
Here.
Councilmember Barker.
Here.
Councilmember Dietz. Your Honor, Councilmember Dietz was just released from the hospital today, so he will not be here this evening. He is doing much better, by the way. Councilmember Surtee.
Here.
Councilmember Severs.
Here.
Councilmember Wilson.
Here.
6 members present. You have a quorum, Your Honor.
Presentation and discussion with Detective Chacon and Canine Officer Sienna.
Which is missing.
Where's the dog?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council. I'm going to have Detective Chacon. We didn't bring the dog because we didn't know how big of a crowd we were going to have. Our original intention was to do a little show and tell for you all, but because we didn't know how big of a public audience we were going to have, we didn't know how the dog would react with 25 or 80 people here. So in lieu of that, we're just going to do a real quick oral orientation to you all. And at your leisure, we'd be more than happy to do a special demonstration of what the dog's been trained to do. And with that, I'll pass it on to Detective Chacon, and he'll go through the process.
You're not as pretty as the dog.
I'm close, though. I know I am.
Well, good evening, Vice Mayor, Mayor, Council, and the staff. Officer Chacon, the Canine Officer with the Canine Unit. And unfortunately, Police Service Dog Sienna is not here tonight. However, what I'm going to do is cover a presentation for you that hopefully will give you an idea of where we started and where we're going. In November of 2007, we traveled to Indiana to Vaughn Lake Kennels for a 3-day period. Over that period, we tested approximately 10 dogs. Some of the things we looked for, without getting into all the details, were what a dog would have courage-wise, play drive, and prey drive. What that means is you put a dog under stress for its courage. It's kind of like how we respond, is it fight or flight. Play drive, prey drive is just pretty much what it says. As long as the dog will keep playing, it'll keep hunting, and it'll do its job until it's over. So after those 3 days, there's a police service dog we selected, Sienna. Sienna, when we bought her, was 3 years old. In December, she turned 4.
How do you pronounce
Yeah,
that?
pronounce her
Belgian?
name.
I'm sorry, she's a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois.
Malinois.
And what is the difference between that and a German Shepherd?
Really?
I think for some of these questions, if you don't mind, I'm going to introduce him real quick. This is Ty Morgan from Pinell County. He's actually the master trainer who got us through the program, and I'm going to let him field some of these questions
Okay,
also.
let's be quiet then.
Sure, what was the question? I'm sorry. You want to finish your, what was the question?
I was just wondering the difference between a German Shepherd and a Belgian Malinois.
Malinois. The difference is they're both bred and trained basically in Europe. One comes from a different part of the country where they started breeding the Malinois versus a German and a Czech Shepherd. So Czech Shepherd will come from the Czech Republic, the old Czech Republic. German Shepherd comes from the Germany area, and then the Belgian Malinois comes from usually Netherlands or someplace like that.
Oh,
So, but they're real similar in breed.
just a regional difference.
One thing nice about Sienna being a Malinois, she's very sleek, she's very dense. She's if you look at a shepherd, their backs tend to slope. She's very straight, she's long-legged, she's fast, and it's nice for me because I've already had to lift her up into things, and it's easier to handle her that way. Just real quick, one of the accommodations, the vehicle, we took a patrol vehicle, an older one, basically took out the back seats. They put in what they call a canine insert or a cage. Inside that cage, all the back windows are automated, and there's a fan mounted back there. If for some reason the temp sensor reaches the temperature I've got it set for, the alarms will go off, the horn will honk, the windows automatically go down, and our fan kicks on, which obviously is really important for the summertime. One more feature in the back is the automated door popper. I usually keep that control right here on my belt, and it's mainly for an officer safety issue. If I'm having a problem with somebody or I'm getting taken care of myself, I can pop that button, call her, and she'll engage who I'm dealing with also. Okay, after we bought her, her and I got acclimated together at home for a few weeks. At that time, we got set up with Ty Morgan, who you just met, who owns Octoon Kennels down in Florence. He put us through a 6-week, 200-hour academy. What you see next are the items that we covered during that academy. Basic obedience was the beginning. During that time, we also worked on the narcotic recognition. She's learned to recognize the methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. Continued training, we go into the patrol functions. Handler protection, that's pretty self-explanatory. Her and I are very close. If I have an incident, I'm 99% sure she'll do what she needs to do to protect me. She'll do building searches, area searches, and criminal apprehension. In that type of case, a building search or an area search where there's a burglary and we think somebody's inside, for officer safety reasons, we'll send her in first to try to clear that building and locate the suspect.
You've done that already, haven't you?
Yes, we have. She's been successful in 2 scenarios in the real world in that type of what I just explained to you, and we'll cover that at the end here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. All the training scenarios were done both day and night, outside, inside. We tried to fluctuate between buildings here in AJ, down in Florence, wherever we could get areas to work in. Narcotic detection was the same thing, buildings, vehicles, wherever we could find some place to hide it and make sure she was ready to go for certifications. At the end of the academy, Mr. Morgan was able to set up with LifeNet for Sina and I to do a helicopter ride, which actually made sense in case a situation arises that we got to be airlifted somewhere. So now her and I know how to load in, get secured, unload, we can fly. So actually that was pretty exciting. January of this year, actually that was 2 days, the 22nd and 23rd, we started our certifications down in Florence. The NPCA, National Police Canine Association, we certified what you see there in the narcotics of methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. And also the same association, we certified in all the patrol functions that I covered earlier. The secondary certification there, the National Detector Dog Association, was also for narcotics for the same ones. So basically in 2 days, she's certified with 2 nationals in narcotics and 1 for patrol. And actually she did it first time. We didn't have any hookups. She was boom, boom, boom. We got it done and we certified the first round. This next one's pretty important. After we certified from this point on to maintain those national standards, we need to keep up with this type of training on a weekly basis. Minimum of 4, 8's more apt to be correct, for court reasons. But you need to maintain those standards in what I have listed there. The obedience, the narcotic recognition, the patrol functions, and handler protection. Because when we go back to certify again, we're going to cover all of those same items one more time. So it's important to keep these up. In-service training is kind of scattered throughout the state. Some of the agencies I've been able to hook up with and train with are who I have listed there: Chandler PD, Tempe, Pinell County, and Mr. Morgan here has been pretty gracious to have us down south. Okay, to end this, you're going to see the stats right there since her and I hit the street to this past Saturday, March 1st. I'm not going to go through all of those, but what you'll be able to see if you read like the first one, this is where the dog is really important to have. In that first one, A, we made a felony arrest with a felon that had warrants. We knew he was in the residence, but he was refusing to come out. Once the dog and I were at the door, we made the announcement. He could hear her barking out there. She knows what to do. At that point, subject says, okay, okay, okay. Puts his hands up, don't send the dog. And that's a great ending. Everybody's safe. Officers didn't have to go in. Who knows what he's got in his room, and the dog did her job. The rest of those you can see are real similar to what I just explained. Another interesting one, I'm going to go to D.
Air duct.
Subject was hiding in the residence, didn't want to come out, so I sent her in to look for him, and she found him inside an air duct, where actually he was halved over, and when I peeked open, I could see his boots. And at that point, I gave him commands again, and okay, 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 don't send the dog, and he walks out. So those are huge, huge pluses for having the canine. As far as her narcotics goes, on Saturday she found a quarter-pound of marijuana, which was actually outside under a dumpster. We've also found methamphetamine, paraphernalia, and pretty much everything you've seen on the list. As you can see there, 17 requests by patrol during their traffic stop to have the canine come and search vehicles, and that's exactly what she's there for. And they're catching on to be cognizant about calling us out there. 2 requests by adult probation to use her, and that's also great because they have those rights with their probationees to go in and search their residence. So probation's pretty good about calling us saying, hey, come and help us. And also we've found drugs during those. At this point, if you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to field them.
Any questions? I'm just curious, when you serve a warrant and that, is the dog trained to automatically attack the person?
There's a couple of different scenarios there, and actually, Cena works on commands. So she works
That's what
on
I say,
when I tell her to go do it, I can actually give her a command to go search, and I can give her the other command to go search and attack.
Wow.
So she knows both. Or what I've been doing, I like to keep her on lead a lot, which is better control of her. And that's the way I like to work right now. I've done a couple of area searches where we know somebody ran with the subjects out of the area and she didn't find them. But to answer your question, she works on command, and the attack command is totally separate than like the search command.
So this is a better dog than we wanted, right? We wanted, when the first request was made, it was only for drug sniffing. And we asked why not a dual-purpose dog. So we ended up getting one that's more than just a sniffing dog.
That's correct. Just, again, I don't mean to keep pointing back up at the screen, but if you look at A, B, C, D, and E, to me, we've accomplished the goals that we've set to do already. We've done 100% of what we got her for. Now the question is, can we get the big load of drugs? Can we get the guy coming in that's got 100 pounds he's taken maybe from Mexico to AJ to somewhere else? And actually, we're working on those things.
Can she find dead bodies in trunks?
No, she's not a cadaver dog. No, she's not.
Start training her.
Okay. I just wondered, how often do you have to recertify her?
It's once a year.
Once a year?
But certifications are offered, correct me if I'm wrong, throughout the year. There's maybe 1 or 2 that happen, so I don't think there would be a problem with us going to like Payson this summer, where they have the big organization, the seminars, and certify again and run through their training. The good thing about doing this more often is they do a lot of different scenarios. They put us in different environments, different obstacles, dealing with different people, dealing with different narcotics. In other words, what you may have for methamphetamine, the odor might be a little bit different than what I have. So it's good for her to get exposed to all those environments.
Let me help you out.
Go ahead.
It's very, very important for the dog to continue to certify every year. The dog to have in-service training and continue to meet that national standard that he's already met. Without meeting that national standard, anything that he does with the dog can be challenging
There's some
for,
liability
and your
there.
attorneys will tell you the same thing. He's done very, very well and met those standards, and he needs to continue to meet those standards. And hopefully I'll cover some of that. But the MPCA, I am an MPCA certifying official, so I do certify dogs all across the state. And he also certified in National Narcotics Detection Dog in their narcotics phase. So to his credit, he has 2 certifications nationally for narcotics detection and 1 for his patrol functions. So, and we did that in a pretty crammed time, so he did very, very well. So.
Ty, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Now, a dog like this, does the dog have to stay busy?
It has to stay very busy, yes. It's very important. Dogs are much like children. If they stop doing things repetitively, they forget it, like riding a bike. Dogs have very small brains, and I hate to tell dog lovers that, but they have very small brains, so you have to be very repetitive with them as you're training them, continue to put them through the same scenarios over and over again to make sure that he documents that dog met these standards over this period of time between the national certification times. So it's important that he be with a certified trainer that's documenting the fact that on this date he trained, the dog was put through these exercises, and the dog met these standards. So therefore, if he goes to court, 6 months after he's certified nationally, he has that documentation that says last week his dog met these standards as well as 6 months ago. So it's very important. There's been some case law, not necessarily in the Ninth Circuit Court, but there's been case law in other circuit courts that had said if you don't continue to meet those standards, you very likely could lose those cases. So that's very important stuff. And your attorney could probably tell you better than
Have
that.
a lot of hard work, not
But the
only
dog
for
has to
him,
stay
but the
busy.
dog.
Very
Is
busy,
that
yes.
right? I mean, I don't,
Use them daily.
you gotta use them.
Oh, sure, if you don't use it, you lose it.
That's the point that I'm saying.
Yes, I don't know how else I'd answer that, Mayor, but yes, a dog should stay very busy. And, well, I got some things that I'll cover for you as soon as you're done asking Officer Chacon questions. I just thought I'd help him out on that national certification stuff.
Yes.
So, one question, you said you do 8 hours a week in training with the dog?
4 to 8 is what's really specified, and we do that already.
Is that spread over the entire week, or is it?
No, we do it in one sitting, because if I go to another city, not only are they getting ready to do their 4 to 8 hours, they've already got it set up to cover everything. They've got their narcotics hidden, they've got decoys set up, so it's boom, just stay there and just get it all done. And actually, I kind of like it that way. Then I can move on to what I need to the next day instead of worrying about having to be in Tempe or someplace else. But what I do locally with her, if I go more than 2 days without us doing something or her finding drugs, I will go hide them. I will do it somewhere. That way she keeps fresh on what she needs to keep fresh.
That's the point that I was getting at, okay.
And day off like today, normally she gets a day of rest, which she needs, and I can tell by the end of the week she's tired, because she won't be as rambunctious as she normally is. She'll get a day of rest like it was yesterday. Today we do a long walk, play ball, she does some obedience, she's happy, she goes back, and that's her work just for the day. I'll do the same thing tomorrow. We'll do something every day, except for the 1 day off.
Officer Chacon.
Yes, sir.
I think that some of the confusion that has happened here is, and I'm guilty of this too, I thought when we brought in a police dog that you and that dog would basically be partners every day, every shift. That dog would be in your car. And I'm thinking that now that's not the case. She's being brought in more and more as needed, and as needed for training, but it's not an 8 hour a day, 40 hour a week shift.
I think in some aspects you're correct. Let me try to clarify that. Right now we're working 4 10-hour days. We spend one of those days either 4 to 8 hours doing training, which is the in-service training we all just talked about. I'm also spending part of my time still working up in narcotics under the Criminal Investigations Division, so that obviously is somewhere away, and then the balance of that is spent working on patrol with the canine.
Because I've already heard that we paid all this money for this dog in training and she's being kenneled, we're not using her. That's not the case, is it?
Well, when I'm up there doing other work, yeah, it is the case, because she's sitting next to me in the kennel. I'm just being upfront with you. She is sitting up there with me. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. I've got a habit of moving my hands. And
But we are utilizing the dog as much as needed right now.
Well, if we could do more, we should do more. If we can adjust things to get her out there on the street a little bit more instead of doing other things, that'd be great. But that's really not my call to make.
Okay. Anybody else? Thank you very much, Greg.
You're welcome. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor Insulaco and Vice Mayor Eck, Council. Some of you know me from the past. I was the Vice Mayor for the town of Florence for 6.5 years, and I've dealt with some of you in that aspect. I'm also a sergeant with Pinal County Sheriff's Office. I've been a law enforcement officer in this Pinal County area for over 25 years, so I've run into most of you a time or two. If I haven't, then you're probably more fortunate than I. So I appreciate the invitation to be here. It's an honor, it's a privilege to be before you to talk about this program. What I've told the chief and everybody that I get involved with, when it comes to canine training, canines in the modern law enforcement world today, it's a lifestyle for me. It's what I do. It's not a job. It's not something that I can just put on the hat and go to work and then take off the hat and go home. It's more of a lifestyle for what I do. So that's why I train dogs outside of law enforcement, outside of the sheriff's office, and for other agencies around the state. I do commend you for taking the steps to create the program that not only you and this police department can be proud of, but goes very far in creating a much, much safer environment for your two-legged officers. In many cases, a lot of people think of the old canine programs, the liability that existed with old canine programs and the way that the dogs were trained back then. Trust me, I was there. I trained dogs back in the 80s, and the type of dog we trained back in those days was much, much different than the dogs we train today. The dogs we train today are much socialer. They do react on command. If they don't react on command and they don't demonstrate they can react on command, they're washed out and they don't successfully certify like your dog has. Because of you, your agency, and most of all because of Officer Chacon, this program in a very short period of time has met and in some areas has exceeded the national standard for the canine program. And you'll hear me say the national standard because that's what we base everything on. That's what case law, that's what everything we do. It's much like the average, most reasonable person when you're talking about law. We deal with the national standards when it comes to canine deployments. Your team is certified through MPCA, which is the National Police Canine Association, and the NNDDA, which is the National Narcotics Detection Dog Association, and is now working the road. I'm hearing not as much as she should probably, but she's working the road. It is very important for that dog to stay active. I don't know what your manpower issues are and what that administrative issue is. I can tell you that through the years of training dogs for law enforcement, the perspective of looking at it from an administrative perspective versus a worker bee, much like me, a ground pounder, is we as canine officers actually create more manpower than what people realize. And I'll give you a typical example of that. If you keep your dog on the road, working the road like the dog should be working, for instance, if I took a very small bag of methamphetamines and hid it someplace in this council chambers, and I took 4 uniformed officers and told them, go in that council chambers and search it and find that small bag of methamphetamines. It would probably take those officers 4 to 5 hours to search this area thoroughly, and probably a 65% chance they'd find it. That dog could search it in about 5 minutes and about 95% chance of finding it. So you've actually freed up 3 officers to continue to be proactive officers, to be out in the field doing patrol work like they should be, rather than occupying them, searching vehicles, searching houses, doing those things that dog can do in a much shorter period of time. So you're creating much more man hours by utilization of the dog correctly. You're also creating a much safer environment for the officers. Officer Chacon just indicated one in particular time where all he had to do was get to the door, announce, and let that dog bark, and the suspect was more than willing to come out. For whatever reason, suspects will give up easily to a dog, when not so easily to a man. I don't know if it's a pride, if it's an ego, I'm not sure what it is, but suspects will much more than willingly give up to a dog. So you end up getting a suspect apprehended without physical injury to either the officer or the suspect because they're more than willing to give up to that barking dog. So that's a big benefit. As a stats keeper for my canine unit with Pinell County for many years, I kept stats of what we call apprehensions with bites, apprehensions without bites. That means the guy gave up before the dog was able to engage them. And the apprehensions without bites was much, much, much higher than the apprehensions with bites. And that's a very good thing as far as attorneys are concerned. It's even a much better thing. If your dog is able to apprehend people, get people in custody without causing physical injury to either the officer or the suspect. And what's more, you're not even exposing your officers to that possible injury. They're not even breaking what we call the fatal funnel. They're not even going inside the doorway. The guy's coming out to you because the dog's present, so that's very, very important. Let me make sure I cover everything. The last thing that I'll tell you is you've created an excellent program. you're on the ground floor of something that's very, very important to law enforcement in your community. The very few things that I've talked to you about officer safety, about saving manpowers and financial things. In order to continue that, Officer Chacon is going to need, his partner and him are going to need a continued mentor program, somebody that's certified, somebody that knows what they're doing, someone that's going to continue to make sure he's meeting those national standards. It's very hard for him as a single canine officer for this agency to be going everywhere all of the time. Although that's what's necessary, that's what he needs to do. He needs somebody that's going to educate themselves and become very knowledgeable about case law, about canine deployments, everything there is in the canine world, to be able to mentor him and keep him going forward. He also needs in-service training, like we talked about. The national standard is 8 hours of in-service training for a dual-purpose dog. What it means is, what they say is 4 hours of in-service training every week for every specialty your dog does. A dual-purpose dog does 2 specialties, so they require 8 hours of in-service training. And last but not least, he's going to need your support and the support of his agency to continue to do what he does and do it to the best of his ability. You guys have really created a good program. I commend you. A lot of people in your position, because of the old myth of the old canine programs and the things that old dogs have done, they're unwilling to put that foot forward to try to create this program because they're just not knowledgeable. And that's what I would suggest is stay knowledgeable, stay involved, give him the support he needs, and you'll see that this program will blossom and become a very, very good program for you guys. So thank you very much for having me here. I had a great time with Officer Chacon, your agency, and Sina. I wish she'd have been here too. I was hoping she would be here. When he showed up without her, I was like, "Where's the dog?" You know, she's the grandstander of the whole thing. So I will tell you one quick story before I go, and this is for some of the attorneys present. My first canine deployment, I'm also a certified expert witness in Superior Court for canine deployments. And one of my first canine deployments with Pinal County Sheriff's Office, the guy fought my dog pretty much. He ended up getting bit in probably every limb of his body because he was fighting with my dog, and the dog re-engages when he's tore off a bite. The prosecutor for Pinal County Sheriff's Office wanted to reduce those charges going into the grand jury because of the injury sustained to the suspect. And my comment to that prosecutor was, "Sir, if it would have been me hitting him with my nightstick or physically subduing him, causing those injuries, I would agree to you. But it was my dog, and trust me, people like dogs." He went along with me and took it to grand jury as was, and the only question that the grand jury ever asked me was, "Is your dog okay?" So they indicted him for everything. So that's the difference between utilization of a dog and a good program. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ty. Tony? Yes.
I just have one comment. I just have a concern. The way it sounds like is we're not fully using the dog as much as possible. And I'd like to see that we do that if whatever the situation is, that we get the dog out on the street more as many hours as possible.
In regard to the dog being utilized, I mean, we've only had the dog since January, like almost the end of January. And I think from the statistics that you're seeing, I mean, you've got to realize that we talk about the dog not being engaged for 8 or 10 hours a day. The officer, and unfortunately, the dog can't write reports, so there's always going to be some downtime when the officer is sitting at a desk and the dog's going to have to be kenneled someplace versus locked up in his car. So I think there's a misnomer there that the dog is not being utilized. It is being utilized as much as we can, and we're talking about adjusting hours so we can get more time out there for the training. Okay. But in the first preliminary stages, along with Pinal County and Ty and Detective Chacon, we're working on that program to make sure that we can utilize it and proficiently as they're beginning to learn now how to work together. So this is like only the second month, month and a half.
Look at that.
And if you look at the statistics for 1 month, and they haven't, patrol division has not even begun to utilize them as much. A lot of this is self-initiated activity with the call-out. So this is the beginning. It will be utilized, I can assure you, a lot more, but remember, you know, you got one dog, one officer, and they both do need time off too, so, and we do have to write reports for court. Otherwise, those statistics don't mean anything. Those people are walking away. So I thank you. I assure you that it'll be done, but it's kind of a misnomer. It's not being used as much. It's as much as we can without writing reports.
All right, thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief. Need to teach the dog.
Do you have anything, George? Okay. Discussion of proposed policies governing the rehabilitation permit fee fund. And that must be Roger.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Roger Hacker, the grants coordinator for the city. This evening, staff would like to talk with you about a program that we've outlined in your staff report that actually began in 2003, which was utilization of the permit fees that were paid by contractors that were working on housing rehab funded projects. As the staff report indicated, there had been no guidelines developed for that program, and we're coming to you, and we will seek direction tomorrow evening, both to get your blessing to continue the program and also to get your blessing on the guidelines that we have proposed. Just as an aside, Ms. Patel and I were sitting through the call to the public a couple of weeks ago at the City Council meeting, and there was a homeowner that was having an issue with an awning that needed to be relocated. This fund potentially could be used to help that homeowner out, because this fund is to be kind of the court of last resort for those people that fall through the cracks with every other program. So we have found it to be effective, to be helpful. For folks, we did a case back in January with a woman who, again, fell through the cracks. There wasn't any other funding available. So the staff is respectfully recommending that you would give us your permission to go ahead with this. And I would just like to run through very quickly what staff has proposed. And Ms. Patel came up with these guidelines back in December of 2007. Again, court of last resort, number one, they don't qualify. The homeowner does not qualify for any other programs. The things that this pool of money would fund would be under the definition of emergency that is contained in the housing rehab guidelines that you have already approved previously. This is the last resort funding. The home that would be repaired would have to be located within the city of Apache Junction. The resident, the homeowner, must own the home. There's a maximum of $1,000 that would be available in terms of a grant unless there's some extenuating circumstance, and that amount could be exceeded if it was checked off and given permission by the Director of Development Services. So we have some checks and balances in there. Like our housing rehab guidelines that you've previously approved, the pool of money would be there to help someone who's elderly, and that definition is 62 years of older, or 62 years of age or older, have a disability, or have minor children residing at home. And the income guidelines that would be associated with this fund would be the same as the housing rehab guidelines. If there's any questions that either myself or Ms. Patel could answer, we would be delighted to do so.
Any question for Roger?
Yes, Roger. Has anyone contacted this lady that you referred to discuss possibilities with her?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I do not believe so. We thought it was appropriate to get your blessing and present this information to you before we got anybody's hopes up. So that's why we sort of fast-tracked it, and we apologize for doing that. We will be coming back tomorrow evening to get your blessing. So long answer to a short question, no, we have not contacted the homeowner.
Because I won't be here tomorrow evening, I'd like to say right now that I think the program is wonderful. It's nice to know that it is there, and hopefully it can be put in place and utilized for several people in our community. You definitely have my blessing on it.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
How much is the total funding on the program, Roger?
The fee, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the fees were starting to be collected in 2003. And they were collected 2003 to 2006 when the staff that had been coordinating the housing rehab program left employment of the city. During that time, we had collected $3,200. So it's not a lot of money, but it's a pool of money that can help us do some things that we can't do.
I just wondered about the $1,000 maximum, and I thought, boy, to do some rehabilitation, there's a lot of things that cost a whole lot more than that. But seeing as how it's $3,200, I didn't know if it was $20,000 or.
We wish it, we wish it was. And with additional grants that will fund additional housing rehab projects, you know, we can help that, if you give your permission, we can help that pool grow.
Roof that's gone, they can't afford, it's leaking, they can't afford to fix it, you know, and.
Well, in a Vice Mayor, in a case like that, we would work with the person. If not this, we would contact CARA, we would contact the other typical suspects, for lack of a better term, that would fund something like that, and we would work with a homeowner. We wouldn't just say no.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yes.
Yes.
How can we work towards building that fund larger?
I think, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I think the first thing is to give us your permission to go ahead tomorrow evening. If we get that, then we will continue to administer it. Ms. Patel will track those funds when they come in, work with finance so that we can help that fund to continue to grow. The other thing would be when we come back to you asking for your permission to submit housing rehab grants, that is going to indirectly help the fund grow also. So that would be the two concrete ways that you could support that.
Okay.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council.
Yes.
Items 5, 6, and 7 can be done together.
Okay. Discussion of resolution number 07-46 declaring as public record certain documents filed with the city clerk entitled Amendment to Apache Junction City Code, Volume 1, Chapter 6, Animals.
And Mr. Mayor, we can, like I said, we can do them all together.
Okay, let's do them all.
And I'll start.
All right.
Looking at tab number 5, that's the authorizing resolution. That you've seen this before, by the way. You saw this last month, and you asked us to meet with Councilmember Wilson because there were some concerns. Mr. Wilson was not here for these items. We did meet with Mr. Wilson, myself, Officers Sully and Newell, and we worked out some new language, which I will point out to you. Once again, number 5 is the authorizing resolution. We don't really have to go into that one. That's just legalese. Same with ordinance. Actually, ordinance 1310. That's item number 6. That is the meat of the project. And I will point out the changes or the major things of these Chapter 6 amendments. Should have in your packet a highlighted copy. Red shows deletions with the strikeouts. Yellow shows highlights. Going to the first major item is on page 5, vicious animal. We've changed the definition. That is essentially the same. We didn't change anything. Mr. Wilson agreed with that language, but that's a highlight of this amendment. Then going to page number 9, personal animal kennels, or personal dog kennels. It's a new highlight. There was a discussion on how many dogs one could keep in the city limits without having to get a permit of any kind. If you look at letter A, you see the highlight, and then there's a strikeout of any person who is not required to have a commercial kennel permit and owns more than 3 but less than 6 animals of the same species over 5 months of age must obtain a personal kennel permit. We've changed that. In the new highlight, we've broken this into a Class 1 permit and a Class 2 permit, and there will be different fees for each permit, which will be the next tab. A Class 1 permit would be for a personal dog kennel, shall be required for any person who owns, maintains, or harbors at least 4, but less than 6 dogs over 3 months of age. Class 2 permit would be for a personal dog kennel. It shall be required for any person who owns, maintains, or harbors at least 7, but less than 9 dogs over 3 months of age. And if you look at tab 7 right now, the dollar amounts for each permit on page 204, the Class 1 permit would be $40 annually. The Class 2 permit would be $60 annually.
Can we interrupt if we need?
Yes.
So Chip, is this where this would help the person that had the rescue?
Yes.
So he would have to get a permit that it's pretty low at $40.
Yeah. Well, he could do either one in this particular case. He could do a Class 1 permit if he was going to have up to 6 animals and the ability to handle them, or he could actually go to the Class 2 if he was going to more.
And
What
that's
his
very
question
affordable.
was, is he has an individual he knows that has rescued some animals, and he was concerned on how they would be addressed at this, and what they would have to do and come up with.
Well, it'd fit into the Class 1 or Class 2 category. And the Class 1, if he owns, maintains, or harbors, or at least 4 but less than 6 dogs, 3 months of age, that'd be the Class 1 permit. And the Class 2 permit, it's between 7 but less than 9. So I don't know how many animals he has or how many dogs, but it would depend on how many he has.
All right, I think that's going to be acceptable.
Joel, is there rules in here? Say somebody has the Class 2 permit, they've got 8 dogs. Is there rules in there that I haven't seen that says the dogs must be spayed or neutered, they cannot be breeding them, any of that?
That part would be under letter C. I'll read it as if it was new language. All dogs covered by a personal dog kennel permit shall be vaccinated, licensed, and spayed and neutered.
So how
Now,
does that
there's-
work if they're breeding these dogs?
A dog owner may apply for a waiver of the spay or neuter requirement as long as they obtain a veterinarian's written opinion that such surgery would endanger the life of the dog, or a certificate from a vet determining that the other dogs owned by the owner or those maintained or harbored at the same address are spayed and or neutered. Now, if they're being sold, or you said they're being bred for sale, then that would come under the commercial dog kennel permit.
Okay. And we're going to cover that?
Yes.
Actually, we didn't really change anything from last time under the commercial dog kennel permit, but that is on page 8.
Joe, we removed the J portion of it, which presented a problem.
Right.
That was removed.
We had removed that last time, I believe.
I just wanted to make sure that we weren't making it too difficult for them to breed small dogs if that's what they do.
Well, I think that was part of your objection last time, and that had already been removed, because it did reference you back to C, D, E, and F, and G for pet shops. And I know that was an issue with you months ago.
Well, like I said, there was a big difference between a pet store and a person who breeds dogs for sale in their
Yes.
home. And now it seems like that is covered.
And we took out the 20 square foot issue from that particular provision. Now,
And also about keeping any 2 pets together and all that's taken out?
that was taken out under J, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, for a personal animal or personal dog kennel permit, there are some federal regulations that apply as to how many square feet you need to have them. And if you have specific questions, I can have Officer Newell speak to that to avoid any kind of dog hoarding issues.
Dog what?
Hoarding.
Are they specified anywhere in here?
The regulations are referenced by their legal citation. That's on page 9A sub 4. Provisions of the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 9, Volume 1, 9 CFR 3.6, relating to animal floor space shall be considered when granting the above noted permits. Do you want to hear from Dean on that?
Yes. Just had a simple question. Are these rules and regulations reasonable?
Yes, they are. They're very much reasonable. It's a federal guideline, and it's to prevent overcrowding and having animals in a small confined space. It's not healthy for the animal to be in.
Okay.
Okay, continuing on to page 11, cruelty, neglect. We left that language the same, but that is a major amendment to this chapter. And another change, since we met with Mr. Wilson, starting on page 20, maintenance of property, under section 6-6-1. The issue there was, what is a nuisance? Maintenance of property. No person, firm, or corporation shall be permitted to keep or harbor any animal in such a manner that the condition of the animal shall cause insect or rodent breeding, obnoxious or offensive odors, or those that constitute a public nuisance. An odor constitutes a public nuisance if it interferes with the comfortable enjoyment of life or property by an entire community or neighborhood, or by a considerable number of persons. That language is taken directly from ARS-13-2917, and that is the nuisance section for criminal nuisances and any private nuisance action that the city attorney or county attorney can make on a particular person or property. One of the big issues was the next section, sanitary regulations. This dealt with essentially horse manure, and we did change some of the language under A. Manure shall be removed from any yard, corral, barn, enclosure, or any other structure used for the purpose of housing, keeping, or caring for any animal or livestock, as often as necessary to maintain a sanitary premise that will not cause a hazard to the health of an animal or livestock. In the definitions, animal does not include livestock. That's why we referenced livestock in this particular section. Also, B, drinking troughs shall contain clean and fresh water and shall be provided with adequate overflow drainage, and such drainage shall be controlled so as to prohibit any flow onto adjoining properties or the breeding of mosquitoes or other noxious insects. And that was a big issue with Mr. Wilson.
Should be a big issue with everyone.
Yes. Well, I mean, that was an issue that he wanted some language that reflected the containing clean, fresh water.
Within reason.
And then finally, the largest change in this whole code is on page 25. This is the penalty section, violations. Everything except cruelty, neglect, and abandonment, impeding enforcement officer, biting animals, quarantine, and vicious dogs will be treated as civil violations with a $250 fine the first time, $500 fine the second time within 24 months of the first, and then $750 the third time within 24 months. The fourth time would then become a misdemeanor. So there's going to be a tracking mechanism that animal control will be required to handle. And I've been told that they will be doing that, and they can do it. Now, I think they do need to upgrade some of the software, but I think for now they can handle this. That's what I've been told. Other than that, those are the main things. And I think the fees on the next tab, we went through some of those already. There's going to be a microchipping fee. That's brand new. The other ones went up for adoption fees on page 3 of 4 for dogs from 61 to 80. and cats 35 to 60. And that is it. If there's any questions.
Ari, I have questions. Item C on page 3, animal at large. I notice it's changed to private property now, being secured, and I kind of disagree with that one. I have a 17-year-old dog that's been at large for 17 years. It's not going to leave my yard, and it's on my private property, but now I could get a ticket for that dog.
Can I have Officer Sullivan address that?
Sure.
She has some hands-on experience regarding that issue.
Vice Mayor Eck, I just wanted to indicate that I don't have a problem with your dog. It's everybody else's dog that I'm concerned about. When an animal is on your property and unrestrained, another animal comes along that for whatever the reason doesn't like your animal and attacks it, what are you going to do? You have no way.
Well, if it's on a leash, it's still going to attack it.
If it's on a leash, you have a way to pull that animal back.
Not if it's tied up and you're not there.
And if you're not there, this whole thing is all about the animals. It's to prevent this type of thing from happening. If a cat, this is a good question, or good explanation. If a cat runs across the road and the dog goes for whatever the reason, it's never done it before, but all of a sudden now it takes off across the road for the dog.
I won't leave my dog. I see people at all the parks and the subdivisions playing with their
Okay.
dogs, throwing the ball. They're now guilty. They're washing their car, their dog in the front yard.
Okay, but our job is to look out for the animal.
Yeah.
And that's my concern, because if I don't, and that animal gets hit in the street, not only is that owner liable for any damages that dog causes, but the owner is also liable because the animal then was at large. Unfortunately, animals are animals, and they are unpredictable. Same scenario, my dog never bites. Nobody can say that. Dogs do bite, given the right set of circumstances. You may not see them, but they are there.
If I thought my dog was going to bite, I certainly wouldn't leave it loose.
That was an analogy. This is, the point I'm trying to make is that because animals are unpredictable, we have to look at the big population, the big picture, instead of the individual animal. And it'd be for the safety of your animal.
So what would be the schedule of a fine for this?
The same thing would apply.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Siebert, I'm sorry, Surdy. It would be a civil violation, first time, $250, and then it would go up $500 the next time, $750 the next time. And Animal Control is going to keep track of these violations, correct?
That is correct.
So when they go out and they say, okay, I've got to cite this person, they call on the radio to find out if there's been priors. That's my understanding.
Correct.
And then they'd get a response, and then they'd cite appropriately. And it would go into the civil court part of our municipal court, just like property maintenance code violations.
And what about on vicious dogs? I see that we still have this, but still, if a dog bites, it could be quarantined in a yard. And I see where other communities euthanize them if it's serious enough, and we don't require that.
Each case is a different scenario. A lot of things will depend on if the animal has been previously vaccinated, if the rabies license or the rabies certificate is still current. Was the animal at large at the time of the incident?
Well, now, if it's on private property, it's going to be responsible, right?
I'm sorry.
If it's on private property, it's going to be responsible now.
It's at large.
It's at large. Same difference.
So there needs to be a step in between here, between running at large and confined. You know, the example that he gave, you're out in your front yard, you're washing your car, your dog's out there playing with you. You're in a park, you're playing Frisbee with your dog. That is attended. That's like leaving children unattended at a store. Okay, I mean, they're unpredictable as well. If you are with your animal, that dog is attended. There needs to be something in between here, between just the dog running wild and on private property or in a park playing with the owner.
I think that's where the officer discretion comes in. If they see someone playing with the dog, they're probably going to let that person know, hey, there is a leash law, please keep your dog on a leash. And I'm sure she can probably tell you that they do give out warnings.
It's hard to play Frisbee with your dog on a leash.
Well, I think there's liability issues.
Well, that's where the city dog park comes in.
Liability issues, but on vicious dogs, we don't do anything.
Dog park wouldn't do that.
We will.
It'd still be at large.
It says on vicious dogs that it goes to court, I guess, is what eventually happens.
It's unlawful to have a vicious dog. And
yeah, but what deems it vicious? A dog can bite, give a kid 40 stitches, and it's back in its yard 3 days later, or is it 10 now?
A judge will determine whether it's vicious, and that depends on every situation. They're different. That's what will happen. That's how it has been. The definition here is...
and it hasn't been effective, is what I'm saying.
You want to address that?
What do you mean by it hasn't been effective? Are you talking about a specific case, or is
Several cases. I know several kids that have been bit by, and I won't name the species of the animal, but 40-plus stitches in the face. Dog's not deemed vicious.
Okay.
10 days later, it's back
that
running in the yard,
okay,
or out of the yard.
All right. Then I would want to know what took place to cause the bite. Was the child being abusive to the dog? Was there a food aggression issue? There are things that you need to look at so you can look at the whole picture, and then a decision is made from there how this is going to be handled. Now, if we've got
the dog is just plain mean as hell?
Then there's a problem. And yes, then by rights, that animal needs to be probably deemed vicious, depending on what kind of a background we have.
And then what happens to it, though?
That's up to the judge. That will be up to the judge at that point. But with the tracking system that we're trying to implement,
we will put something stronger in here on vicious animals?
Well, I mean, what do you... I think this is the best you're going to get based on the current status of law. You can't just go and destroy a dog because you think it's vicious. You have to get a judge.
What if a dog bites a kid in the face and gives him 40 stitches?
That dog we would take the dog and we would probably file a...
Right here it says we'd put it in for 10 days, and if it had its shots, you'd give it back to the owner.
Yeah, but during that 10-day period, there could be a vicious petition that's filed, and then that would stay any proceedings for the dog to get out of the quarantine period.
But the dog's not euthanized.
Not during that time, but the dog would be controlled at animal control during that time period.
But what after the 10 days?
That's what I'm saying. What could happen is I could have the prosecutor file a petition to have it declared vicious during that 10-day period, and then it may take another week or two to get to the judge. Meanwhile, the dog would still be held at animal control.
But it's still going to go back to the owner.
Not necessarily. A judge might decide, this is a vicious dog. I declare that it be euthanized. Done. That could happen, and that has happened. And if you want, you can ask Ms. Coyne what her experience on petition for vicious dogs is.
So some of the ways that he would declare if it was vicious or not would be past history of the dog, how the attack occurred. Was it being, what's the word I'm looking for?
The attack occurred when I was walking with my 4-year-old boy hand in hand, and a pit bull bit him in the face.
Right.
And you're on your own. The city doesn't do nothing for you. You're on your own.
That's not exactly true. If animal control's involved.
It's taken for 10 days, and now it's deemed vicious, but it's back out on the street 10 days later.
Well, I don't know the specifics of that. I don't know what exactly happened, whether they were
that's
called.
what this says.
Well, that's one remedy, okay? The other remedy, during that time, if we know that there was
I'm
a bite...
saying, why can't we add the language that if a dog viciously bites like that, it's that obvious. Okay, let's say 30 or more stitches, it's vicious.
Well, no, that you can't draw a line like that, because you don't know what caused the dog to bite that individual child or person.
So what if it was totally unprovoked? Would that be declared vicious?
It depends on that by itself, unprovoked. I don't know. There'd have to be other factors that come into it. This process works. Mary Ann, do you want to come on up for just a sec? And can you explain your experience with petitions for vicious animals, and approximately how many have we done?
Well, Mayor Insulaco, Vice Mayor at Council, actually, we've only had one hearing that I recall on a petition for a vicious dog. I'm not sure, Vice Mayor Eck, if you're talking about Apache Junction, but I have never had anything brought to my attention about any dog bites and anyone wanting something to, declared vicious, or we would do a petition to the court for that.
No, what the officer says is there's nothing that can be done. Animal control takes over. And that's what I was told. And I see in other communities, the dogs euthanized, period.
How long ago was that?
Oh, my boy was 4 years old. He's 19 years old now. It's 15 years ago.
But I also think that sometimes what happens...
But we've had one petition. I mean, I think other communities have, I'm saying if a dog viciously bites one time, it's a vicious dog, and I think it should be destroyed. I mean, if it's not, if there's no rationale for its biting, is what I'm saying.
That is up to a judge, and there is a definition of vicious animal, and that's on page 5.
Yeah, I know.
It's pretty broad.
It's very broad.
We have the mechanisms in place for doing petitions to the court to determine a dog being vicious. As I recall, one of the dog bite cases I had, it was determined that the children were provoking a dog, and this was inside someone's private home where these people were invited into the home. And that was a situation where it was determined that there was provocation on the part of the child that was invited into the home. So in those situations, it's going to be a little bit difficult to find that a dog is vicious when it's been provoked.
Marianne, is there an investigation that is launched into every dog bite that is reported?
I believe that animal control does investigate every dog bite. Now, whether that investigation gets to our office to pursue a petition or not, I don't have any control over that.
So the only way that would happen then would be animal control does their investigation, and then it would go to you for a petition of vicious.
Right. They would recommend to me that we do a petition to the court to have a dog determined vicious based on their investigation.
Mayor, Council, anytime we respond to any dog bite, the first thing we do is start an investigation. Why did this bite occur? And we have a bite report that we fill out, and one of the first check marks, provoked or unprovoked. We're going to interview the dog owner, the victim or the victim's parents, witnesses, and determine why the dog bit to begin with.
Okay, so if it was a serious injury that occurred from this and it was unprovoked, what do you do?
If it was unprovoked, the first thing I'm going to do, given the situation, like a situation he's talking about, me as an animal control officer, it's then my responsibility to go to the city attorney or the prosecutor and request a petition for a vicious hearing.
Gotcha.
And any animal control officer is going to do that, and especially at the request of the victim or the victim's parents. I want this dog, and we hear that a lot, I want this dog euthanized. Well, if everything in the investigation warrants that, then we will petition the court for a vicious hearing on that animal. No questions asked.
I'd just like to state for the record that I would like that procedure to happen every time. If it's a pit bull, a Great Dane, or a poodle, it doesn't matter the breed, that needs to happen.
That is protocol, sir.
Good.
I'd like to,
Happened when my dog bit me.
on the difference part of this, the dogs at large, I have a problem, but I don't because the dog was put down because of old age. But I had somebody call because my dog was at large, and the officer that responded is standing right out there. I was washing my car in my yard, and the dog was in the garage with the garage door open, and did not have a chain on, didn't have nothing. But just like Officer Chacon just said, he went by commands. This dog, and like I say, I refuse to believe that you cannot train a dog this dog would not move unless I called him. Howard Logsdon got the call, and he came down, and he called the dog would not move. I mean, rabbits and everything else. I mean, so
Yes.
there are certain, it's up to the owner. So if this is the discretion of the officer, that's fine. Like I say, this dog was in the garage sitting there while I was washing my vehicle. And Howard Logsdon could not get that dog to come out of the garage.
See, now, like,
So what I mean to say, he had the discretion. He was
Yes.
able to say, no problem, and he went on his way.
yeah, like he stated, officer discretion. If the dog's at large, and that means it has access to the public. If you can display to me that you have control over your dog, hey, we're good.
That's all, that's what we're asking.
Yeah, we're good. But there are the people, the unresponsible pet owners, that without this at-large law, the way it reads, will leave their dogs sitting in the driveway all day while they're at work, unsupervised. Kids get off the school bus, walk by the driveway. The dog just doesn't like the smell of that one particular child. Okay, he's
I
off
agree
and
with
running.
you. And I can't say that if my dog was out there by himself, that he wouldn't do that. But if I was out there, he knew better than to move.
Yeah, so you could display to the officer present that you have control of your dog.
The proof's in the pudding is right out there if you want to call him in. He couldn't get that dog to come.
Exactly. So I'm not even going to say anything.
This is interesting. I would like to know how, Joel, how is it written, giving him discretion to make that call, when it's in black and white right here in the book, that it's illegal if it's at large? And however it's written, I'd like to use that wording and make it work for staff discretion on other items as well.
I don't think it says an officer can use discretion, but that happens every day with every single contact they have with the public. So that's different than another issue that I know you're thinking about. It's different than a zoning issue.
I know
This
it
is
is.
an enforcement issue on animal control from Chapter 6.
I know.
That is quite different than a zoning issue.
This one's dangerous.
Well, zoning cases can be dangerous too, so.
No, I'm just saying, they practice discretion every day, and they need to be able to do that. A little chihuahua in somebody's front yard, running around with the owner, they're going to use discretion to say that is not creating a hazard right now.
Mr. Wilson.
Yes, I got two, actually, questions. Number one, on the, going still at the at-large area. If your animal is behind a fence, is that considered at large, or is it considered properly detained?
If it's behind a fence that is contained on your property and does not have access to the public, that would not be at large.
Except their front yard fences can only be 4 feet.
And I might bring to your attention too, the county, in Pinal County, outside of the city limits, at large is at large. In your garage, and it's, again, officer discretion, and if you can display control of the animal to the officer, then there's not a problem.
So it's like that in a park as well?
Yes, except now dog parks have the exception to the rule for at large, because it is an area designated for dogs to run and play. And technically, it is contained by a, larger fence, in a big area, maybe the size of a football field or.
But that's in a dog park, which we don't currently
We
have.
don't currently have in the
So
city
in
limits.
one of our city parks, it would be considered at large right now?
Yes, it could.
Yes.
That is a public area, has access to the public.
Robin just made a suggestion to me that we put in the words unsupervised.
I like that. Unattended, unsupervised?
We have had that in the past, and I know it was, I think in 2000 it was amended, and I think it became an officer issue on whether it was a interpretation issue. We can certainly look at that and we can bring it back. We can talk to the officer to see if that would work. Unattended somewhere in the definition, that's what you're looking for?
Yeah.
Well, I was just, in listening to all this, it appeared to me that everyone was saying basically the same thing, that they're with their dog, he's with his dog, they're with their dog. They have liability at that point, correct? Because they're
Yes.
with the dog. So
That they do.
therefore, a supervised dog who is at large, that adult or that person, kid, adult, whomever, is now liable for that dog.
The problem is if, even say they're walking down the street with the dog, it's not on a leash.
But we do have leash laws.
What's that?
We do have leash laws.
Right, but if they're in attendance with the dog,
No,
they're
I
not in
don't.
violation of at large, and then it attacks someone, you can't get them at large, you get them on vicious animal, but you have to do a petition.
But you
I
have to-
think we're addressing was the idea on private property.
Right,
On your
we were
private property.
talking about private property.
We're not
Okay.
talking walking down the street. We're talking about in your house or in front of your house.
While you're washing your car, your dog's sitting there. You're supervising him.
And what about the case where you take the dog to the park?
I
mean, would that fall into that too, or no?
No, because there's leash laws. So you have your dog on a leash, and you're controlling, right? I mean, you can take your dog on a leash.
Yes, on a leash.
Yeah, so you've got the leash law.
I just see a lot of them in the subdivisions and the little parks, and they're throwing the ball, and the dog's not leashed. And
Yeah, but you've got too much
But-
public in public parks to have unleashed dogs running around.
Yeah, I
Whether
see
they're
it
good
a
dogs,
lot.
bad dogs, or in between dogs. I mean, dogs are dogs, and they like to jump on people and say, hi, how are you, and all that, and that could cause some real consternation.
And a little boy can stick his finger in his eye, and guess what? That finger's gonna be.
Or attack another dog.
Or attack another dog. I was trying to stay away from that part
I
of it.
think we've got that pretty
I
well
think we're
covered.
pretty well done.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I do like adding
Chip had
something
one
to
more thing.
private property.
Oh,
And Jeff.
I'm sorry, Jeff, I keep looking down there.
Okay, I got
Chip,
one thing
too.
more. Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm just always amazed, there are tens of thousands of cities in this country, and we act like on things like this, like we're writing laws that have never been written. I mean, there's got to be precedent in all the other cities on these. Why do we always have to come up with brand-new solutions to
'Cause we're a unique
questions that
city.
have been out there forever?
Well, this is taken from different cities. This whole, this ordinance, I didn't write all this. I mean, this is years of amendments. Some has been replaced, some has not. Some is very old, we got rid of some of that. And some was taken from the county, some was taken from other cities and towns, like the cruelty sections. That came from Tucson, I believe, and also the county. So we're not just making up stuff.
Could we, in the future on situations like this, can we kind of like, in the preparation, show that like 60% of the cities do this, 80% do this? If there's cities that are up, 90% of the cities do such and such, I think it would probably be a good idea for us to, if they're a western city with our situation, that
Depends on how comparable
we
they
should
are to us.
possibly.
Well, that may
save
entail,
us, it could save us months of going over things.
that could entail a lot of research that could delay bringing projects to you. We haven't had that done before, but I can tell you that these are
I don't mean
consistent.
poll, obviously, I don't mean poll every city in the country. I mean, just the ones that are available,
Sure.
And I assume this discussion is intended to exclude land use and zoning kinds of issues.
Yes.
Please.
Just,
We shouldn't check with other
We're not-
cities on land use
No,
and zoning
he's
issues.
talking about the dogs.
Yes, I just wanted to affirm that that was the direction.
Chip, you had a question?
Yes, I know the Superstition Horsemen Association submitted a letter to the mayor and city council. And one of their suggestions, well, first off, they thanked the animal control for their outstanding job on February 5th, where the 185 animals were taken care of. But they also suggested that the article that's written regarding livestock be their own separate area, like, for example, they have potbelly pigs, because they are different, and really and truthfully, the personnel that's going to be overseeing this needs the proper education and training into some of the issues. Is it possible to do something like this? I know I asked the question, we didn't ever really follow up with the answer on it.
Can we have biting horses as part of that? We have biting pigs,
They're vicious.
and they're vicious.
Well, I think the answer is, you could put it under a different label, but it's going to have the same verbiage. It doesn't really change anything. And we've talked about having language in here about bringing in experts, but we'd have to do that anyway if we went to court. It's part of an evidentiary issue. And you don't put everything in the code that would entail all the rules of evidence. We don't do that. You'd have to bring in certain experts to prove certain things, especially when it came to horse manure. In order to prove that kind of case, we'd have to bring someone in to prove it. So there's a proof issue. It wouldn't just be the prosecutor testifying. It'd be someone who knows about animals, because we know the other, or livestock, and the other side would probably bring in someone who's an expert. So we know that it'd be a battle of experts. So, I mean, we certainly could remove that or put it into a different section. I know there was a talk about removing that section completely, but animal control did not recommend that. But this is your ordinance, this is your canvas, as I used to say. I mean, this is your art, and if you want to paint it a different color, we can do that.
You're so colorful to me.
What a creative man.
I like putting something about on the private property as far as attended or supervised. And that's about the only thing. Really.
We can do that.
I see what you're saying about going to court as far as the vicious animal. Every dog in the city should be licensed, correct?
And vaccinated.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that don't realize their dog is supposed to be licensed because it's an inside dog, it's in the house, and they don't license it. And I just wonder if we have a way of notifying citizens that your dog really should be licensed,
Do a public broadcast on the government channel.
It's something. I know a number of people that have no idea that their dog's supposed to be licensed because it's just an indoor pet. Or they got the little backyard, and that's pretty much it.
It's state law, it's city law. I mean, some people don't know they need it.
It's on their property, and it's not. They don't plan on it.
I understand. Some people don't believe they have to have a driver's license either. I mean, it's that
knowledge. They don't realize it.
Some people don't realize they need a driver's license too. Yeah. Ask Mary Ann and myself. We've been with people, and we say, "Oh, I didn't know I needed one."
Yeah. I don't know how a driver's license compares to having a little dog.
I think we've
done more. Mr. Mayor, I just have a question.
Yes.
For Joel or one of the officers. On the microchipping fees, on page 2 of 4, ordinance 1311, it has listed $25 per at-large dog, and then $12 per adopted cat. Is that a service that's also available for an adopted dog?
That will be every adopted dog will go out of the shelter microchip.
Oh, okay, because I didn't see that anywhere in here.
Dean, can you stand up and explain that process?
Should it then say includes microchipping or something like that?
Did we decide, I think you and I discussed that, about putting that in the fee schedule, adopted dog?
Explain the process first about how microchipping is going to come about, because I'm not sure everybody understands that.
Yeah, every dog that is adopted out from Apache Junction Animal Control will leave the shelter spayed, neutered, licensed, vaccinated, and now microchipped.
Okay.
So that means if you pick up the dog off the streets, what happens to that particular animal? You're going to microchip it?
Yeah, now if we pick up a dog running at large, it's impounded because we don't have an owner. If that animal is claimed by the owner, they'll have the impound fees, the license fees, and the $25 microchip fee. That way, it's already known to be a problem dog running at large. We caught it red-handed, so now.
Red paw. Can I come in and just get a microchip?
That was my question.
No, we'd have to recommend you to the vet. We don't want to take away from local business.
Okay.
Why only dogs?
Cats are permitted to run at large and roam free, and now adopted cats at request, we can microchip your cat for identification purposes.
But you're not doing it to all of them that go out?
No, it's an extra fee if they wish.
I have one more observation. If I was a dog and Howard Logson was trying to get me to come out of a garage, I wouldn't come out either.
Okay, if that's it, we'll go on. Thanks, Robin, I needed it. Discussion on city towing policies, and they got me up here.
Well,
I think
I can start.
That was the mayor's item.
Okay, I know you had an...
It was him.
Well, he had an issue, he wanted staff to come back with the answer as to whether there is a stipulation in the towing regulations about how many list companies can be on the list per X number of population. The law changed, actually, in January 1993. It went from 5,000 to 10,000 population, so it'd be one list company for each 10,000 population of the city of Apache Junction, plus one alternate company. This changed in 1994 when the new towing regulations were passed, and that has been the law since. So there is no regulation as to how many you can have per population. It used to be in the law, but it changed back in 1994 when the new towing list, which you do have in your packet, was adopted under ordinance number 885. And these are the current rotation list requirements that we go through whenever we have a new or even existing company. The existing company has to meet every single thing on this list. And a new company would certainly have to do that.
Yeah, I guess my concern is there's free enterprise and all that, but the three companies we have are all pretty much starving anyway, and then you get somebody from the outside come in and,
Just
you know.
breaks up the pie even more.
They'd still be rotation, so they'd get even less at that
Yep.
point.
The council has the ability to change this if they wish. It's done by ordinance. You have that discretion.
Your Honor,
Yes.
I have a question. Could I ask Chief Kelly, would you address this for me?
He was afraid of that.
Yeah, he was. I saw him sigh. Are we having any particular problems with the rotation and the towing that we're doing right now? Do we need more?
I don't know if we need any more. We have the routine issues that we have with any rotation process. There's always competition. This latest one that came to light was alleged the person is now in the community and they have all the basic requirements to put in there. We're applying for the permit to become another tow company, but they have to be within the city for a variety of different requirements. But I haven't heard of any specific complaints that we have with any tow company per se.
So it appears to be meeting the needs, what we have right now. I guess that was the question.
Yeah, I think we're sustaining what we need, and with the tow company we have, it's just that we had another tow company that came in and said we would like to apply, and then we just go through the process of making the checks and balances, and then we recommend it up to be reviewed. It was just that it came to our request to have it looked at, and that goes through our regular process. We check with the owner and do the checks and balances.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Chief, one question. When another tow company comes on, is there any background check on any of these, or?
Yeah, there's a myriad of different checklists they have to go through. They have to be a resident a certain time, they have to show residency, and then there's checks on the equipment and the yard and security, and there's a myriad, like I said, of checks that we have to go through. I think there's like 25 or 30 minimum, plus what our criminal histories.
Including zoning, too.
Pardon?
Zoning is a huge issue, and that they have to meet the zoning. The yard does, and where they keep the trucks, and where they store things.
Joel, you said before there was calculations that were in the ordinance.
You
And it
mean
was-
per population, one per so many thousand people?
Why was that taken out?
I wasn't here, I do not know. You can ask the city clerk, she might know, she might remember. That happened back in 1994.
93 into 94. And the council then opted to go with the rotation list with all these other standards instead of just a population requirement.
So basically, back then, they said, you know what, we really can't fight free enterprise. As long as they qualify, we can let them in, let's get rid of the standards and the numbers.
I'm not sure it went that far. I think it was just, let's beef up the standards for coming into the city, licensing requirements, the condition of the tow yards, location of the tow yards. I don't think there was really any consideration of whether there was a population figure in there one way or the other, because Robin was on the council then.
Based on what they said,
consideration of that.
based on what they said when they were here is, all the other communities have these standards based on population, and now we don't. So now we're faced with a moral dilemma here. Do we fight free enterprise, or do
I'm
we-
not sure that's accurate. I think, to answer Mr. Sturdy's question, I am pretty certain that a majority of the cities and towns in Arizona have contracts with tow companies rather than a rotation list. Now, a contract, that's where you would bid it out, and we have talked about this before. I know Mr. Powell brought it, or I think you presented on it once, and there was no interest of council to have a contract procedure. Because a rotation list that does foster more of a pro-business attitude. Whereas where you just have one company, I mean, you can control things easier with that one company, certainly. You can certainly do that. But this city has opted not to have contracts. Instead, there's a rotation list and there's requirements to meet that rotation list.
But there's no based on population of how many companies can get on that
No,
rotation list?
That I don't know about other cities, whether they do that, but you can do that. That, I don't think there's any law prohibiting it. It's a legislative act. If someone doesn't like it, then they can refer the matter to the voters if you don't make it an emergency ordinance.
Yeah, there's nothing that says you can't take the same policy you have now and add back in the population requirement in addition to all the other things that are in here.
That's what our current companies were requesting, isn't it?
Sure,
Oh,
because they're
one
trying to
company
protect
was.
yourself.
Right.
Now, there is one company that has asked to be on the rotation list, and they did ask if you did pass something, I think they would come under the old rules unless they abandoned their request to be on the rotation list. And there were certain requirements they did not meet, and I think PD is conferring with them currently.
Your Honor. One of the considerations that was talked at great length about for several months, if I remember, is that what was done is they did a mini study, approximately how many calls there were, how many times people got called, et cetera. And it was based on the fact that the three companies were actually maybe even too many, but they were all still part of the city, and the council at that point decided, okay, those three companies, based on the number of calls, based on the need, those three companies would be adequate. That was, if I recall correctly, that was basically why the decision was made at that point, that there was no need, because we actually would have had to cut a company at that point based on the figures. We would have had to cut somebody.
So we got rid of the figures so we
So
could
we got
just
rid of the
keep what we
figures so
have.
that, because we felt, and the towing companies and the police department, all those parties involved felt that 3 was a good number, that it worked with the accident rate, that it worked with the need for towing, and so that's why it was changed.
So and if the number of 3 is still adequate,
Right, and that's basically what I was
a little
asking.
late
If
now,
that
though,
is still adequate at this point, then it seems like it's serving the need, because isn't that really the idea, to serve the need both of the
Right.
public and of those people who are running a business and
well, and they all say that it is adequate, so how do we deny somebody from being able to come into town with a new business?
Well, then it ceases to be as adequate, I guess, is what they would say. So that's a decision the council would have to make if they wanted to open it up, because you would probably have several companies that would be moving in and be very interested. So it is a dilemma.
Joel, now that there's a fourth applicant, though, realistically, there's no way of saying, we already have enough, if we don't change our policy through this, we'd have to say 4 as of now, if we have 4, correct?
Well, it depends. If that company decides to abandon the effort, and then you decide to change this code soon, then you could keep the 3, keep it to 3. You could do that.
Can't do it right now.
Well, you could do it, but I believe because they're in the pocket of trying to comply, and they have some hurdles, which I don't really want to get into due to legal issues at this time. They may abandon their effort. I don't know. They may not. They might be trying to meet with PD and trying to meet all the issues that came up when I reviewed the application.
If for some reason it failed, I would suggest that we're at where we're at. But we'll see what happens in the future.
Your Honor, I have a few questions for in the future.
Yeah.
If one of the 3 companies went out of business, or if one of the 3 companies changed ownership, they would stay in the rotation, and if we went down to 2, would we then solicit a 3rd company to come in?
No, I don't. No, if you don't have any restrictions on it, it's whoever wants to come to the city, fill out the application, and then if they meet everything, they could certainly compete with the other companies and be on the tow list. That's the current policy. Now, if you wanted the city to go out and actually actively recruit for the rotation list, I suppose you could make that part of the policy. But now you're getting closer to a contract policy. And like I said, other cities do that, and they're successful at it.
There's a 4th towing company here right now, been in business about 10 years, and there's so little on the call list that they comply, but they don't even mess with it. So there's not enough business in it.
Chip.
So
I just wanted to make clarification. The way the rules are right now, if this 4th company met all the requirements on it, what would happen? If they met everything and they came well within it?
They would be on the rotation list just like the other tow companies.
Yes.
If they did.
If they applied.
If they apply and have met everything.
Yes.
And at this time, there is no such company that has met everything.
And then all 4 of them would make less money.
I don't know. I mean, not all their money is based on PD tows. There's also private tows. So I can't answer that question.
that's why I say this other company, they just decided to do private tows because they said there wasn't enough on the rotation list.
There might be more companies out there that we are unaware of. I don't know.
I think we have several, and the thing about it is that a person has a choice. They can take a tow from the rotation list, or they can call a private company and have it towed, or they can tow it themselves if the PD allows for it. So they have that choice.
Usually when they're in an accident, they're, I found they're kind of lost because they just let the PD call and they don't really know who to call because, you know, if it's an accident scenario,
I think PD could, they are given an option, though, if they opt.
Sure, they can call whoever they want to, yeah.
I have a question for Kathy. What kind of tax revenues are generated from the towing companies? Is it 2.2% like other things? Or?
No, there's an area of the tax law, and Bob ran it past me the other day. It depends on their licensing. And I don't mean business licensing, but their carrier licensing.
The gross vehicle weight, if they're commercial or?
I believe so.
Bigger vehicles, smaller vehicles?
I think it does have to do with commercial licensing. I'm not able to give you all the details on that.
Because this goes back to the conversation we had about bringing in the malls or the plazas and stuff, and I think you called it leakage. You know, how much, if we bring in more companies and, gee, we got more businesses here, are we going to make more tax revenue, or are we just going to take away money from the companies that we already have that are bringing in the tax revenue?
Well, bottom line is, and I can bring this information back to you when this item comes back, it may not make a difference depending on how the individual companies are licensed at the state,
Right.
so.
Could we have some of that information before this comes back to us?
Yep, sure can.
Thank you.
Is there anything else? No, I'm looking at you.
Chip always leans forward.
That's why I can't see you.
That big old mustache.
Okay, if there's nothing else, we're adjourned. We have water board tomorrow night.
Yeah, no e-session.
No e-session. No e-session. Well, not for the
No,
city.
we do have an e-session for water.